Welcome to Retire Repurposed. Well, last week we explored Arthur Brooks's happiness formula: faith, family, friends, and work. Today we're taking a deeper look into that fourth element, work in retirement. At first glance, work in retirement seem contradictory, but the importance of meaningful work in retirement cannot be underestimated. Drawing from Tim Keller's book, Every Good Endeavor, Connecting Your Work to God's Work, Ben Taatjes explores how work isn't merely about having a job, it's about connecting with something much deeper, God's work with humanity and His kingdom. We are made in the image of a creator. That means our essence is to create, to contribute, and to make something meaningful. Whether you're compensated or not, it's irrelevant. This creator mentality must continue in retirement. Join us as Ben explores the Hebrew origins of the word work from Genesis, revealing how God's creative work provides the model for our own meaningful engagement in retirement. This conversation will transform how you think about productivity and purpose in your post-career years. Enjoy this episode. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Retire Repurposed. I'm your co-host, Jared Sebesta. So glad that you're joining us here today. If you are new to the podcast, we talk a lot about retirement, obviously, but we also talk a lot about work, which is an interesting position considering that retirement is kind of the deletion, the removal of work from one's life. But there is such an important aspect to work. And so we're going to spend our episode today and this conversation today talking more about the importance of work at a deeper level. If you missed last week's show, very interesting conversation that Ben Taatjes and I had, talking about a conversation that he had with his oldest daughter during an 18-hour car ride back from her first year of college. And we talked about this importance of faith, family, friends, and work. And I want to bring Ben Taatjes on the show now and kind of just do a little bit of a recap. Interesting conversation, but you said that your daughter had some challenges last year, her first year of college, and it comes back to this idea, this combination of these four attributes, which lots of times dictates our happiness. She had some, but kind of missed out on a few others, right?
Yeah, I mean, she's doing great. I mean, she's thriving back at home, and again, going back to college next year, and all will be good. But I think, anytime you kind of go through, whether it be a big challenge or a small one, kind of like hers, you hopefully learn from it, right? And if you're going through a challenge today, I would just encourage everybody, just, again, see yourself on the other side of it as best you can, and then stop and not enjoy the pain, but feel like, okay, what is God trying to show me? What good plans does He have for me in this challenge, in this setback, in this hard time that I'm going through? And I think that was one of the things I was able to do with my daughter on the way home. It was just like, okay, so yeah, college was, great. You got good grades, I will talk about that today and kind of how that helped, but wasn't enough, right? You had a couple friends, but maybe not the level of what you saw that being, right? And you're a long ways away from home, so your family connection is less. And ultimately, of the four, the one that was just as strong as ever and needed to be was her relationship with God, and kind of what she saw as that rock in that time. So yeah, it was a very, very fun car ride. I mean, 18 hours goes really quick when you haven't seen somebody in a while. Yep. And today I'm excited to kind of continue that conversation, right? About what I think for our listener, for somebody who is deciding if it's time to be done with quote unquote work, okay, move on from their 9-to-5 job, whatever it's look like, some things to consider. Because what I've learned in watching many retirees over 20 years is some of that will creep up on you. Some of the positive aspects of work will surprise you in just how much you actually miss it.
Yeah. It's going to be a really great conversation. If you missed last week's show, please go back and check it out. Make sure you subscribe. Leave us a positive rating and review. If you log on to your favorite podcasting platform, we talked about kind of this happiness equation, the combination of faith, friends, family, and work. Really interesting conversation. If you're missing pieces of each of those four, it's definitely going to affect your life and your happiness level at any point in time, but especially in retirement. So go back and check that out. Ben, let's get started on today's show. We want to do a kind of a continuation. We're going to dissect more of this idea of work. Before we get started, again, this is not the first time that we've talked about the importance of work. And again, just for a reminder for people who maybe haven't heard our show a lot, it's kind of a juxtaposed position where it's like we spend a lot of time talking about retirement, but talking about work. But at the end of the day, work is a really important piece.
Yeah, Jared, it's not just work, right? But it's meaningful work. It's something that is beyond ourselves. It's being part of something that's allowing us to use what God created us, how God created us, in order to make a difference in other people's lives. And, the studies and kind of the things that we were looking at last week was an extension of Arthur Brooks. And he looks at, components of happiness and those, 4 key pillars. I think being, in our position as talking and coaching people through the step of retirement, right? Which, like you said, is no more day job. Essentially, it's giving you those 8 hours of your life back to not be at the office, to not be at whatever, at the hospital, to be wherever you're working, whatever job you're doing, you are no longer there. So I think it's important. And we had entire shows in the past about will we work in heaven, right? And my answer is just yes, absolutely. That's how we're created. And we're talking about more of that today. But I think it is very, very beneficial in a retirement decision to first focus on your work, right? To first look at what was the positive aspects of work, what are the key components. One of my favorite questions, is like, tell me about your best day at work when we're going through this process of working with a new retiree. And they're also often like, well, I'm moving away from work. So no matter what that was, right, that's what I'm getting away from. And the key is no, the purpose and the meaning, right? Moving beyond a job to a calling. If that's how you can look at it, very, very important to look at that.
It's so interesting because we think, and when I say we, I'm really clumping a lot of people together, but we think once I retire and I remove work away from my life, then all of a sudden my happiness, my quality of life goes up. We spend a lot of time saying, no, you need to not only incorporate that, reincorporate that on perhaps a different level. This is the true path of fulfillment, not the removal of it. So again, I'm excited to dive in. Where do you want to start with this? You started reading a new book and kind of getting some more insight from yet another author. Last week, Arthur Brooks. This week, Timothy Keller, right?
Yeah, so Tim Keller, he's passed away now, but has just amazing. He's just a great author that I've come to love. And he wrote a book called Every Good Endeavor. And basically the premise is he's trying to connect our work to God's work. And it hit me, again, as I'm reading this, right away in the introduction, Jared. It kind of came back. Again, I'm visiting with my daughter, and we're looking at the, really the key components of work. And it hits me, right? She's getting straight A's. She's getting achievement, but not getting meaning or significance, right? And Tim Keller, in this book, Every Good Endeavor, he opens it up in the introduction, referencing another book. So a lot of books going on here, but Robert Bellah and the Habits of the Heart. And I'll quote this, I'll read it right here. To make a real difference, there needs to be a reappropriation of the idea of vocation or calling. A return in a new way to the idea of work as a contribution to the good of all and not merely as a means to one's own advancement. And I even put a big note there. It said, this is Lauren's lack of fulfillment with straight A's at college. Because the reality of it is, one of the key components, I think, for any college kid that's missing is meaningful work, right? So we're learning how to be. Right now she's in nursing, and she's getting straight A's, and she's learning how to become a nurse someday. But she is not a nurse today. So she gets an A. She's like, yeah, I've nailed that subject matter. I'm moving on to the next thing, And there's achievement, but there is not connection to the work. So again, now I'm seeing this complete difference. Now it's summer. She's back, and now she's working as a CNA. And she comes back, and there's hard days, right? Work is like that. It's not always going to be perfect. But she comes back from one of her shifts, and she was just so excited. She's like, Dad, it felt so good today, and I could just see the difference in her. I was able to apply some of that knowledge, right, that she was learning to her work as a CNA. But then she was able to take it even a step further, Jared. And in one of those proud moments as a dad, she says, Dad, I actually started praying with some of the residents. When I put them to bed at night, you never know. This could be their last night. Some of these people in their hundreds, like somebody's 104 and in their late 90s. People in the nursing home generally are of that age, right? Mm-hmm. And man, to hear your daughter say, I started praying with one of her residents, and she was so alive because, again, there was something deeper than just getting A's at nursing school or at college, but she was applying it. She was making a difference. So as far as moving from achievement or advancement into contribution, that just is exactly what the author here is trying to say in this book.
Yeah. There's a word that got brought. I had a similar conversation with somebody else in a completely different space, but he used a word that I really resonated with, and I think it comes into play here. He calls it utility. Like life isn't about just building one's, like just striving for more success. There's nothing wrong with that, but if we're missing the utility part, that's where the gold is, so to speak. And I guess the way that I would define utility again is this usage. It's this humanitarian aspect to our work.
Yeah, but I think it's even deeper, right? So it's yes, I'm able to use my knowledge and skill set to do this piece of good. But I think you could end there and say, yeah, it's still a job, or I feel good about it. But what Tim Keller does in his book Every Good Endeavor is now he's trying to connect the utility of that work and the achievement even, and all of it together to the glory of God. So let's even dive deeper into work and say, this vocation is now, when done for somebody else and is done through the lens of God created me to do this, I am building kingdom. Like literally, I am finding my calling. And if you're out there and you're feeling like, I really had a great day at work, many times that's the answer. You've heard my favorite question: what was your best day at work? And people come back with it's some day where they made a difference for people, and they were also able to connect it, right? The use of their skills, talents, abilities to somebody else, but also they felt as if this is where God has me. This is exactly how He wired me and how He created me.
So let's take this a little deeper. What else? Where does Tim Keller take this conversation, and how can we kind of like take this to the whole nother level?
Yeah, he takes it into worldview. Like he says, so if you're operating at faithful work, it should be part and looked at as far as your Christian worldview. So again, when we look at the thought process of why we have work, right? He starts with, we're created in God's image, which we know. He was the first of somebody who actually did work, right? And he wants us to tie that, thinking of ourselves as really continuing God's work that He did when He created the earth, and in continuing to do good work here. And I think that's really important. So if we start with this lens of my worldview, right, and I kind of subscribe to this Reformed theology, which I think I know Keller did as well, looks at it as like our work, to go back to my daughter's situation, like as a nurse, she was called into that in this season. So she's learning how to do it better. She feels her talents and abilities making a difference in a person, but that is making the world a better place, right? The things that she's doing, we look at creation, and she's continuing to make a difference much even bigger than the one person that she's making a difference for, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, I keep coming back to kind of the typical view of retirement where, and we've said it before kind of in jest, where, the typical retirement advice is like, well, make sure you have a hobby and make sure you just kind of stay busy, and what you're talking about is so much, so much deeper than that. It's really having retirees step into a new level of I won't even say work. It's really existence, because really I think our existence is really, it's our full being. It's everything. It's really connecting with why we're here. And so, I mean, if people can hear this and really like digest it and actually act it out, I mean, you're gonna really, really step into something that's really impactful.
Yeah, and I think you're onto it there. Is why are we here?
Yeah.
Right, Jared? So that's people want this. They want to have more than just success. They want to know I made a difference. Mm-hmm. I made a impact. I did something that was beyond myself. And if all we're doing is even in our work, we're creating things that will someday be gone, right? And we know there's a finite amount of time we're even on this earth, right? Mm-hmm. And if we're building something and we're creating something and eventually it's gone, I mean, it can be kind of, I'm not saying it can be kind of empty, but it can be.
Sure.
Like all for naught. Like, yeah. I did this, I did that, I all of these.
What's the book? What's
the point?
What's the book of the Old Testament that is just basically one big pity
well, everything's
party?
Meaningless, right? I mean, yeah. So I mean that can be the feeling,
yeah.
Right? But if we are doing this with a Christian worldview, mm-hmm. if our work was through that lens,
yeah.
God says, "In the Lord your labor is not in vain." Right? In Corinthians, that is something like and it doesn't just say like only for pastors or only those that are actually doing like I feel that's not saying, okay, if you are ministering to somebody, mm-hmm. but your work, like your labor is not in vain because you're doing it all for the Lord. And I think that needs to be, again, the lens at which we say, why is this work so much more mm-hmm. than just a job?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We have to tie it back to that lasting thing. Mm-hmm. What is not meaningless, what is forever lasting, and that is God's call in our life, really what we're doing and how we're making a difference in the kingdom.
Well, you brought up probably not even the $1 million question. It's the question that humanity has asked for thousands of years, and that's why are we here? I will just tell you from personal experience, this is me talking, this is not scriptural, this is just take it for what it's worth. The more that I step into that vein of like, what did he specifically give me that I can now steward through my life and my work? Not just to make money, but to like create impact. The more that I step into that, the closer I feel to him. If I had to answer that question, what is the point of life? The point of life is to connect with your creator. Like the more we can connect with creator, dude, everything gets taken care of, and this is why, or one of the big reasons why you're here. We could have a philosophical conversation about that, but that's kind of where I land. And the more that I connect with my creator, I get more connection the more I step into that and be of utility to my fellow man. It's a super deep conversation, but what an opportunity as a retiree to now step into this and embrace this mindset.
Yeah, I think if you're coming into retirement now, don't just say, well, no, I'm not going to retire. I'm going to stay at this job forever. Right? But I think it's a season in which you can say, okay, I recognize how important work was, mm-hmm. how much closer I was to God in my work because it allowed me to use my skills, talents, abilities to glorify Him. Mm-hmm. What am I going to do now? What is this next season, assignment, this next thing for me going to look like that I can then continue the positive mm-hmm. aspects of work, because we know that's really important.
We were preparing for the show, and you talked about how Tim Keller kind of gave the Hebrew, he kind of gave some of the Hebrew roots as to this definition, the words used in the Bible for work. I found this really interesting. Go ahead and share that.
Well, I think it's interesting that, in Genesis, when God is creating the heavens and the earth, right? In those first few chapters, when he's using the word work and describing the work God was doing, it wasn't like this grandioso thing. Yes, he was doing something grand, but the word specifically used for work was the ordinary human word for work at the time, if that makes sense. So again, don't think of it as like this
snapped his fingers.
Exactly. It wasn't quick, but it sounded, if you look at the Hebrew, according to, again, Tim Keller, I don't read Hebrew, but it was like this it's expected, like it was just, God created and he just pointed it and here it was. But it actually sounds and described more so as blue collar human work. That was the word that was used. I think that's really interesting.
Like labor involved.
Yeah, because he was working. Like there was a laborious piece of creating the heavens and the earth. So again, I've always thought, like, I see this vision like him just pointing the stars and creating that way, and it was just this simple thing,
effortless.
But, effortless creation. But really, it wasn't. It was actually a laborious thing. And then he took a break, stood back and said, it is good. So I think that's really interesting, that satisfaction that comes from work. And I'd never heard that before. I read it in this book from Tim Keller. I was like, hey, it makes a good point. If the Hebrew shows it as a laborious human type work, how close aren't we more to God when we are doing laborious activities, right? And that can look, I don't want everybody to think, oh, that's only blue collar work. That can be your creative work. That can be other things that we're doing, right? With our minds, not just our hands. But I think, again, look at it as not like a simple, effortless thing. There was actual work there.
Well, creating, that you nailed it on the head there. Like we're using our skills, talents, abilities, all of them to create something, and you're not necessarily making something, but also too, Jesus came to earth and he was a carpenter. You mentioned that from the book. I never thought of it that way. Like, out of all the jobs to have, for the first 30 years of your life, that was an actual laborious job that was creating. I've never connected those two dots before.
Yeah, I found that really interesting too. I'm like, he continued like this creative aspect of work being here. So, the Bible says, we know God was fully human, fully God. How that works, way beyond me to explain that. But when he was here, there was sweat, there was actual work. Being a carpenter, he lived until early 30s. So there was a time where he was doing that work. And I think it's interesting that the vocation he chose, like, on earth, was a carpenter.
And very blue collar work. To your point. Not that it has to be that way, but I do find that interesting as well. We got a couple minutes left here. You mentioned the cadence of work and how that is not just an accident that is talked about in Genesis, that was modeled throughout human history, in God's people. Talk about that in retirement. What is that? How can retirees model that cadence that God kind of lays out in His Word?
It's a tough one, right? Because I look at the Scripture, and it isn't God worked for a day and rested for 6. It's the exact opposite, and I think that's hard. So as a retiree coming into this new life of potentially of leisure. Right? If you're doing it the way society tells us retirement's going to look, it's a life of leisure. You're maybe working once a month. Maybe there's no projects. Maybe there's nothing that you're working on, and you're just simply, walking the beach, picking up, seashells. Back to John Piper's work. But I think we know, Jared, right, that that's not how we're designed. It is to just have leisure and to just relax, because I think that's the quickest way to waste your life. It's the quickest way to feel unfulfilled, to feel empty, is to, again, solely look at my own needs. It's comfortable, and really comfortable for a season to do that. And I think there is some rest that needs to be part of every retirement. But again, you have to keep meaning in your life. You have to keep purpose. You have to continue to make a difference in the people surrounding you, whether it be your life, your community. For some people, it might be a little more work than they had planned. And again, don't think work is a bad thing. I want to make sure people hear. Don't think like we're anti-retirement, or now it's time to retire from my lifelong career as a lawyer or a doctor or whatever you were doing, and now I got to keep working, so I got to become a landscaper, or I've got to work at the Walmart greeter, or I've got to whatever it is. Not that those are bad things. Maybe that is your thing. But the key is you can't just downplay how much closer we are to living in the image of Christ, our Maker, when we are creating, when we're doing things, and how far away we can start to look like Him if all we're doing is watching Netflix. There's time and place for that, But if we're trying to live a fulfilled life where we are just loving life and we're satisfied, we're happy, we're content, we have to keep meaningful work as some place in our life.
Securities offered through Avantax Investment Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Avantax Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through an Avantax affiliated insurance agency.